In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your lower ball joint. Let's get started. To start, let's remove the wheel. Typically, you'll have a 21mm lug nut, but these are not factory wheels, so for me, I'm going to use a 19mm. Regardless of your size, remove all 6 of your lug nuts, and then we'll remove the wheel. Next, take a screwdriver, and we have to get this cap off. They do make a tool for it, but if you don't have it, you can hammer a screwdriver in here. Once you get it split enough, you can probably stick a pry bar in here. This will get it out a little further. There we go. Let's get rid of this cotter pin here. Discard it, always use a new one. Take the locking cap off of the nut and then use a 36mm and remove this nut. Shouldn't be too tight. Now make sure your axle pushes through the hub like that. If it's stuck, you can use a punch and a hammer right in the center where there's that divot, and you can slide it through without damaging the threads. From underneath, let's remove the 4 14mm bolts that hold this ball joint to the knuckle. There is one on the back side right over here that you can't see, but it's there. At this point, you should be able to lift the knuckle off of that ball joint. If it doesn't separate, like it's the case for us, just use a hammer and tap it free. Next, we have to remove the outer tie rod from the knuckle. This cotter pin that is in here is just way too rotted to take out. So I'm going to hammer a socket right over it. This is a 19mm, and I'm just going to spin the nut over the cotter pin. We'll deal with the issue later. Take a hammer, hammer this area, and that'll break the tie rod free. Okay, there we go. Next, I'm going to take this whole knuckle and move it to the side like this. You could even push the axle shaft through, and then you'll get more swing out of the knuckle. Get this out of the way. We'll put this on top here. Turn the ball joint. And now we can work on our lower ball joint. Next, let's remove this lower nut, which is a 24mm, but before we do that, try to get this cotter pin out. If it doesn't come out, we'll just have to get the nut off over the cotter pin. Looks like that's going to be the case. So I'm just going to hammer my socket over and take everything out. Now you have two options. You can hammer on the lower control arm and the ball joint will eventually break free. Or, obviously, since we're replacing it, just hit the stud straight up. It's going to be a lot faster. There you go. I'm going to take a rag and just clean off this area here because there's some debris built up and I don't want the new boot squishing up against this debris here. Take your new ball joint, slide it down. Make sure you press it through all the way so you can start the nut on. There we go. Tighten this nut and then torque it to 105 foot-pounds. That's 105 right there, but we need to make sure that the cotter pin slot lines up with the castle nut, which in my case, it actually lines up perfectly. If yours doesn't, always continue tightening. Don't loosen to get these to line up. Slide this through and bend it over to lock it in. This ball joint is actually a greasable ball joint, so if you spin it around completely, this is the back side that faces the frame, but it should come with this little grease fitting that you can thread on here, and we'll snug it up and we'll add some grease to it. Use a 7mm wrench and just make this nice and tight. But don't over tighten it because you don't want to strip it out. Take your grease gun, clip it on here, and then you want to add some grease until you see the ball joint boot start to expand. Okay, I'd say that's good right there. It's full of grease. We'll check back on it at our next oil change, but for now it's good. Now let's put all this back together. If you don't already have anti-seize on the splines of your axles like I do, I highly recommend it. But like I said, mine already does have some, so I'm not going to apply any more. Take your axle, slide it through the hub, move it around until it lines up. Okay, and now just try to line up the ball joint with the knuckle so we can stick the bolts through and clamp them together. Try to start whatever bolt seems to line up first. I got one started. First one's the most difficult one. There's a lot of moving pieces here. This ball joint will just swivel all over the place. With that first one started, I'm gonna try and start a second one. This time it'll be a little bit easier. Okay, I got it, and let's do the other side as well. The reason I'm doing this all with a wrench by hand is because it's very easy to cross thread these into the knuckle. And if you cross thread the threads in here, the knuckle is damaged, and then you are looking at retapping threads in the knuckle. You don't want to deal with that. So just start them by hand, slowly, take your time with this. Now we can turn this, and we can start the bolts on this side. Yep, looks like I got this one going. Okay, they're all on the threads, so let's tighten them up. Turn this the other way, and back over here, let's tighten these. The torque for these 4 bolts is 59 foot-pounds. Now it's time to put the axle nut back on, and I'm just going to bottom it out all the way. And the torque for this is 174 foot-pounds. This not being a locking nut, I can spin it on by hand with no issues, and then we'll torque it. And what actually locks it in is, as you saw earlier when we took it apart, is this cap with the cotter pin. So let's tighten this down. Again, 174 foot-pounds. To be able to torque it that high, I'm going to use a pry bar, put it between the lug studs to prevent this hub from spinning as I tighten it with my torque wrench. That's it right there. Now put this on and make sure it lines up with the hole for the cotter pin. If it doesn't, just spin it until you get to the next slot that lines up. There we go. Perfect. Bend this over to lock it in. Now let's put this cap on. I like to put a little bit of grease around the edge. You can put RTV, or if you don't want to put anything, don't. But the reason I put grease is because it'll help it slide in easier, it'll prevent it from seizing on there, and it will ensure that it's sealed up all the way. Tap it in with a rubber mallet. Okay, make sure it's even all the way around, and if you did put anything on that edge, once you see it squish out, you know it's bottomed out. Perfect. Grab the tie rod and slide it through. Press it in all the way, and put the castle nut on. Snug it up. The torque for this is 67 foot-pounds, but of course after we torque it, we need to make sure that the cotter pin slot lines up with the hole in the stud. If it doesn't, you're going to want to keep tightening and not loosen to get those to line up. Okay, that's 67 right there. Like I said, you need to keep tightening to make this line up, and for me, it's almost there. It's about halfway in between the slots. A little more. Grab your cotter pin, slide it through, and of course bend it over to lock it in. Put on all 6 of your lug nuts, snug them up, and then we'll torque them to 76 foot-pounds. After finishing this repair, it's important to have an alignment done on your vehicle.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.